Welcome back, whiners, to the Wine About Data podcast. My name is Amanda Lopez. I'm president here at Transform Consulting Group. And today I'm joined by one of our own transformers, Rose Johnson.
Yeah.
Rose, please introduce yourself. And it's not your first time on the podcast either.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me back, Amanda. Rose Johnson, Senior Project Consultant with Transform Consulting Group. And I'm really excited to dive into one of the things that I love as a former fundraiser. And
Yes.
that's fundraising data.
Yep, absolutely. So today we're going to be talking about the latest report that came out from Giving USA, which summarizes charitable giving for 2024. So, of course, we had to dig into all the data, right? And to see what was interesting. What does this mean for nonprofits today? What can we learn from the giving trends that we saw last year? And what are we seeing in 2025? So that's what we're hoping to talk about today. But first, before we go into talking about the report, what are we drinking today, Rose?
So we are drinking this Chardonnay from Dolly Parton, our girl.
I know. I'm totally a fangirl of Dolly Parton, and my daughter did this report on her in elementary school, and I was so excited.
She's a role model.
She really is a role model and an icon. So when I saw this wine at the store, I thought, I have to try it.
Got to.
So it is a Chardonnay and it's summertime. So I think it's a good one. Let's test it out, Rose.
Let's try it.
Cheers.
It's good.
It is really good.
Perfect for a hot day.
Yeah, it's a great, crisp, light. It's not like an oaky Chardonnay.
No, it's easy to drink. It's really good.
Yes. Well done, Dolly, as always.
Of course.
We love her.
Surprising.
Okay, so back to what are we whining about today? As Rose said, we are talking about the latest Giving USA report on charitable giving in 2024. So let's get into it. What are some of those key findings and takeaways that we want nonprofits to be aware of? So one of the things it's a big number, but in the United States, annual giving was over $590 billion, Rose.
Huge.
I mean, that is huge.
Yeah. An all-time high, I believe.
It is an all-time high, right? So annually, the giving amount continues to increase. Yes. What I think is significant about the giving last year is that it was over 6% of an increase. So it is higher than inflation. Absolutely. And so that is a positive trend and a positive sign, considering all the changes with the economy and everything that's happening. So
absolutely,
it's really great to see that giving has outpaced inflation. And so that is a positive, encouraging sign for nonprofit organizations. But, as we said, the giving trends are pretty consistent. So there wasn't a huge shift. As the report said, over the last 40 years, we've continued to see these kind of giving trends
stay pretty stable. But it's encouraging to see that that's great. It continues to grow year over year. Even as, the economy changes, we continue to see giving stay strong, which I think is exciting news for fundraisers.
Absolutely. So that's the headline, but let's go deeper, right? And looking under the hood of the data to see what else can we learn from that. So when we think about who is giving, right? Individuals, corporations, foundations, the largest group is individuals.
Always. It really always is. Individuals give 66% of overall charitable gifts. So they're making up 2/3 of overall giving, which is significant.
Right. And last year in 2024, it was an 8% increase. So there was definitely a lot more giving. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what does this mean and what are some of those action steps that we would encourage nonprofits to do looking at that trend. But we also did see an increase in corporate giving as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Up to 7% of overall giving, which is an increase for corporate gifts. And, we never know with corporations. Certainly the economy has an impact on corporate giving in general. So it's a little more unstable sometimes. But that's good news for corporate giving last year.
Yeah. And foundation giving was $100 billion. So that's about 1/5 of overall giving. So again, foundations continue to remain a huge asset in the charitable giving arena through certainly giving grants, being one of the largest forms of ways that foundations help contribute funds. But a specific trend within the foundation world is the growth of donor advised funds, or another acronym, DAFs, that we like to call. So
absolutely. Yeah. DAFs are making up a big portion of that growth in foundation giving, and continue to rapidly increase in the foundation world. So I think we're seeing more and more donors who are interested in donor advised funds, where before we might have seen them kind of kept to a small subset of donors, particularly major gift donors. Now we're seeing that DAFs are for everybody, really. And more everyday donors are considering that as a good way of giving.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Rose. It used to be that you had to have really a more substantial amount of money as an individual to set up a donor advised fund. And now many foundations, sometimes it's, I think, as low as maybe $5,000, to establish a donor advised fund. Of course, different foundations have different rules and considerations, but that, like you said, is something that can be for everybody. And it does seem to be a popular giving mechanism and vehicle that individuals are exploring.
Definitely. And I even saw last week, GoFundMe has started an online donor advised fund platform for the first time.
Interesting.
That's really aimed to the everyday donor. So we even see platforms like that really getting into this space, which is brand new.
Yeah. And I think too, that's probably really attracting a younger generation.
Absolutely.
Really looking at the millennials who like just want to be able to go and find something online, having that digital convenience. You still have to go and meet with somebody at a foundation, to set up that donor advised fund, filling out the paperwork. And so that is an interesting trend for us to continue to look at. The report talks about, why did we see such a huge increase overall in giving and some of these specific trends?
Yeah.
And you alluded to this earlier, Rose, the stock market, the economy has a huge influence, right?
It does.
So certainly as corporations make more money, as individuals make more money, hopefully they want to give back to communities and give back to causes that are important to them. There's also tax benefits that also encourage individuals to give. And so the stock market was doing really well. And so those invested funds grew.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will say though, even in that same breath, I think we might have thought as a fundraiser, you might have thought, inflation might have had a bigger role over people's giving behavior, but we found that in general, individual giving remained strong. Even as inflation increased, folks still decided to spend their dollars on causes they care about, which is really encouraging, I think, for fundraisers.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does this mean for 2025, right?
Yeah.
2024 seemed like a really great win for many organizations. Hopefully, many of you have been able to cultivate some of those increased giving for your nonprofit. But what do we think is going to happen here in 2025 in our magic 8-ball, Rose? what do we predict, and what are some trends that we might consider?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I would say certainly as we look ahead to the next year, we never know exactly what's going to happen, as there may be some instability in the economy. We may not see that growth, particularly in corporate giving that we saw last year. So we may see some additional instability in that way. Can also apply to foundations. We've seen changes in government giving, but I would say, individual giving remains strong and continues to grow, even as the economy changes. So I think we're seeing some positive signs from this year that we can hope for that trend to continue in 2025.
Certainly, it's always good for your own portfolio, right, to monitor the stock market, but that certainly helps influence how those funds are doing to grow and corporations are doing to see what those investments are. So while I know it has been a lot of uncertainty, and we've talked about it here on the podcast, what can you control and how can you influence and best position your nonprofit when there are, changes in funding and uncertainty? And so I think that's a great transition for us to talk about. We wanted to share some key highlights, but also we don't want to just leave you hanging, right? We want to give you some good tips. And that's the point of the podcast here, is to be able to help share, what do we do with this data? What are some insights and takeaways that nonprofits could have now that we are informed by some of these giving trends?
Absolutely. Well, and I think for me, a huge takeaway just continues to be the engine that is individual donors, right?
Absolutely.
Making up over 2/3 of overall giving. That's a huge, huge piece. And I think especially, as we've worked with organizations, we've seen where orgs that rely really heavily on grants and really heavily on corporate gifts often have less stability than organizations that have a more diversified fundraising mix. So I would say, one takeaway is, as an organization, if you don't already have a strong individual giving program, look at establishing that. Look at investing in that, because that is often a really stable form of funding.
Absolutely. And you don't have to start big. We don't have to go for those big, huge gifts. You can start small and start with who you know.
Absolutely.
Volunteers, and there's a lot of data that talks about how we could be doing more to cultivate our volunteers into donors. And donors are really wanting those hands-on experiences too. They don't want to just write the check. And so, but start with your base of where you're at and who's already in your circle and supporting your nonprofit and your organization. If you don't yet have some system, start with an Excel spreadsheet. You don't need to purchase.
Start simple.
Yeah, you don't need to purchase a system and a software, although that certainly helps.
Yeah.
And we, have some tips and recommendations on different donor software programs, but you can start with a spreadsheet to start tracking names and individuals, who's in your contact, and thinking about what is a good way to go and reach out to them. I think the other great benefit of those individual donors is their unrestricted funds.
Yeah,
right.
Oftentimes.
Yep. So for the most part, those are, a great way to help supplement the grant funding that does have those strings and limit how you can spend those funds. And so those individual donors can be a great way just to support the whole organization.
Absolutely. I think another tip is just a reminder to not make decisions for our donors.
Right.
I think as fundraisers, right, oftentimes, particularly as we're seeing stories maybe in the news about increased inflation or, our wallets getting a little tighter when things are tough, it can influence our decisions around our strategy when it comes to fundraising and around our decision making. But I think it's important to remember that even during tough times, the data shows us that people continue to give.
That's
giving
right.
continues to grow. So I think that that's a good reminder that, it's up to us as fundraisers to give folks the opportunity to invest in causes that they care about. And it is a good time to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't want to make any assumptions,
Exactly.
about the state of our donors and their capacity to give. And so that's just why it's really important to continue have those conversations and those relationships with them, share with them what the needs are, and certainly those needs change. Your nonprofit's needs this year might be very different than they were a year ago or 6 months ago, right?
Yes.
With all the changes. And so how are we communicating that to your donors to let them know how they can continue to partner with you and support your organization and your clients?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know we touched on it already, but for me, the last takeaway here is around those donor advised funds. We've just continued to see
absolutely.
those grow year after year. They're continuing to be more popular. They're not going away. And so, I'd certainly say if I were a foundation right now and I were looking at that, I would look and make sure that I'm investing in those and working with my donors to set up those donor advised funds, because that is really the way that more and more donors are choosing to give.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think certainly as nonprofits, how are you having conversations with your foundation partners and those donor advised funds? Some of those donor advised funds have very specific areas of where they want to give.
Yeah.
But some of them don't. They just want to, and they entrust the foundation to support the community's needs. And so being able to support those and have a partnership where those donor advised funds could support your nonprofit is a trend. And I think it's not going away.
No, it's only growing. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we will make sure to share these tips and resources to some of our blogs and other tools that we have in our show notes, as well as a link to the latest report. We are also really blessed and fortunate that the Giving USA report is done right here in our home state of Indiana at the IU Lilly School of Philanthropy. And so they just have a great team of researchers who are really studying this data and helping us be aware what are those key trends and data points for us to be informed about, and some suggestions of what we can do to ensure that we're supporting your nonprofits and organizations.
Absolutely. And in general, the Lilly School is one of my favorite resources as a fundraiser. It's a go-to. So not already looking at the Lilly School of Philanthropy, take a look at what they've got.
Absolutely. Well, Rose, we've covered a lot of content, right? It's been a big report and several tips that we've shared. So if there's one tip or one last thought that we'd want to leave with our listeners, to help them encourage what they can do to help support the fundraising of their nonprofit, what would you share?
Yeah, my tip would be look at the report, right? And I would then look at your own donor data and your own fundraising data and make some comparisons between particularly your funding mix, your sources of funding, and averages across the nation, and see, what percentage of funding for your organization comes from foundations, corporations, individuals, and then reflect on that and see if that's a diversified mix of funding, or if there's opportunities to grow some portions of that to make a more diversified platform.
I love that, Rose. You're applying our data tips, right? Pulling in context for data to compare to your own data and seeing maybe where there are some gaps and there's some growth opportunities that your organization could consider based on this report and the trends that we're seeing. So we hope that this has given you a good, helpful tip and a roadmap of what to do next for your nonprofit organization. Well, let's keep the conversation going. one of the ways that you can do that is by following us on social media, where we share new reports like this one that's released, as well as other resources and helpful tips to support your nonprofit's data and fundraising needs. And if you haven't yet, choose whatever platform you're using to follow your favorite podcast, and you can sign up to make sure that you get the latest release of our newest podcast. In the meantime, cheers to you, listeners, who are doing amazing and important work to transform the world. And cheers to you, Rose. Cheers. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.